My name is Naomi Quinn. For 17 years I was married to Michael, a man who carried secrets more carefully than most people carry their wallets. On the night he passed away, with his hand trembling in mine, his last words were not about love or comfort. They were a plea. "Naomi, promise me you will never go to the old house in Blue Heron Ridge." I nodded, my heart breaking, and swore I would respect his wishes. For years I kept that promise. But grief has a way of reshaping our sense of loyalty. 3 years after his death, a lawyer handed me a small wooden box. Inside was an antique key, heavy and ornate, attached to a brass tag engraved with a single word, Ridge. Alongside it was a letter, written in Michael's unmistakable script. "The house is yours now. Go there once, see what I've built for you, only then decide what to do." I sat in Daniel Price's office, the attorney who had managed Michael's affairs. His polished oak desk reflected the late afternoon light, and between us lay the letter and that heavy key. "Mrs. Quinn," he said gently, "your husband purchased an estate in Blue Heron Ridge about 4 years ago. He instructed me to reveal it only after his passing." The words barely registered. Michael had never mentioned owning another property. We lived comfortably on his engineering salary and my work as a professor, but a second house, especially in a prime location like Blue Heron Ridge, was impossible to imagine. Daniel continued, "The land has become extremely valuable. A resort company, Summit Crest, is developing luxury villas nearby. They've already made offers in the millions." I turned the key in my hand, its weight pressing against my palm. Why would Michael hide something of this scale from me? And why spend his last breath begging me to stay away? The answers, I realized, waited behind that iron gate in the mountains. 2 days later, I found myself driving through winding mountain roads, the key resting on the seat beside me. Pines crowded both sides of the road, their shadows stretching long in the late-day sun. My heart pounded with every mile closer. At last, the GPS announced I had arrived. Before me stood a massive wrought iron gate set into stone pillars. Twisting across the metal were letters that spelled Blue Heron Ridge. I slid the key into the lock. With a slow, reluctant groan, the gate opened inward. The estate took my breath away. Not a simple cabin, but a sprawling house of stone and timber, surrounded by gardens sculpted with precision. A cobblestone path wound through manicured lawns toward the front porch, where flowering vines climbed the beams. Michael had hated talking about his childhood here, yet he had clearly poured his soul into transforming this place. As I climbed the porch steps, the key trembled in my hand. I unlocked the heavy door and stepped inside into a secret world my husband had built without ever telling me. The front door opened into a grand hall with vaulted ceilings and a stone fireplace tall enough to stand inside. But the architecture wasn't what made me gasp. Every wall was covered with paintings, hundreds of them. Orchids of every color and species filled canvas after canvas. Delicate petals frozen in brushstrokes, both bold and tender. My throat tightened. Orchids had been my lifelong passion. I'd spoken of them often, dreamed aloud of having a garden filled with them one day. Michael always listened with quiet patience. I never imagined he was listening this closely. At the center of the room stood a small oak table. On it rested a silver laptop, closed, with a single white orchid placed gently on top. I reached for it, but the crunch of tires on gravel jolted me back. Through the tall windows I saw a black sedan roll to a stop. 3 men stepped out, each bearing a resemblance to Michael, his brothers. And by the looks on their faces, they weren't here to welcome me home. I froze, my hand hovering above the laptop. Outside, the men moved with the confidence of people who believed the property was theirs. The eldest, Victor, was a grayer, sterner version of Michael, his jaw set hard as he led the way. Behind him walked Pierce, the middle brother, sharp-eyed and carrying a leather briefcase. The youngest, Noah, trailed a step back, quieter but watchful. They mounted the porch and pounded on the door. "Naomi," Victor's voice boomed, "we know you're in there. We need to talk about the house." I stayed silent, my pulse racing. Michael had warned me about his family's bitterness, though he never gave details. Now, seeing their expressions through the side window, I understood. They weren't here out of love or grief. They were here for the land that had suddenly become worth millions. Ignoring their pounding, I opened the laptop instead. The screen flickered on, prompting for a password. With shaking hands, I typed the date of our first meeting, followed by the word hope. The screen unlocked. The screen lit up, revealing a single folder labeled for Naomi. Inside were dozens of video files, each marked with a date. My hand trembled as I clicked the first. Michael's face filled the screen, not pale and fading as I remembered from the hospital, but vibrant, healthy, full of life. "Hi, my love," he began with a crooked smile that made my chest ache. "If you're seeing this, then I'm gone, and you've come to Blue Heron Lodge. I knew you would. I recorded these so you'd never feel alone, not even now." He drew a breath, his eyes steady. "There are truths I never told you. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with a brain aneurysm. The doctors gave me time, but not much. I didn't want you or Sophie living under the shadow of my illness. So, I used those years to build something beautiful for you here." Tears blurred my vision. Even from beyond the grave, Michael was still explaining, still protecting. And then his tone darkened. "One warning, Naomi. My brothers will come. They've always believed this house should be theirs. Don't trust them." Michael's face froze on the screen as another heavy knock rattled the front door. "Naomi." Victor's voice boomed again. "This is family business. Open up before we make this legal." I pressed pause and wiped my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. Through the window, I saw Pierce holding a sheaf of papers, waving them like a weapon. Noah stood with arms crossed, his eyes cold. Michael's words echoed, "Don't trust them." I clutched the laptop closer. If there were answers, they were here, not on the porch with 3 men who suddenly cared about a property they had ignored for decades. Their pounding grew louder, more insistent. "You're only making this harder on yourself," Victor barked. "The courts will side with us." But before panic could overtake me, Michael's voice seemed to return, calm and deliberate. "I prepared for this. Look in the drawer beneath the table. You'll find what you need." I pulled it open. Inside lay a thick blue folder, its edges worn, Michael's handwriting labeling it simply, "Proof." The pounding suddenly stopped. Through the side window, I saw Victor step back, phone pressed to his ear. Minutes later, the sound of sirens carried up the gravel drive. A patrol car rolled to a stop behind their sedan. A young deputy climbed out, adjusting his hat. "Mrs. Quinn," he called toward the door. "I have paperwork requesting inspection of the property due to a contested inheritance claim." My chest tightened, but I remembered Michael's instructions. I pulled the blue folder from the drawer and opened it. Inside were neatly organized deeds, notarized signatures, and bank transfers, evidence of a legitimate purchase made years before. When the deputy scanned the documents, his expression shifted. He turned to the brothers, his tone even. "This paperwork looks valid. If you gentlemen wish to contest ownership, it'll have to be handled in civil court. Not here, not today." Victor's face flushed with anger, but he said nothing as the deputy returned to his car. The brothers lingered a moment longer, glaring at the house, before finally retreating. For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of control. After the patrol car left, the silence around the estate felt heavier than ever. My eyes drifted toward a glass structure at the edge of the garden. Drawn by curiosity, I walked across the lawn and pushed open the greenhouse door. Warm, humid air rushed over me, thick with the fragrance of damp soil and blossoms. Rows of orchids stretched in every direction, rare hybrids, delicate species I had only ever read about. At the center, a brilliant blue orchid stood proudly, almost glowing in the filtered light. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a woman's voice said. I spun around. A woman in her 40s stood near the orchids, holding a small spray bottle. She wore worn work clothes, her face calm, her eyes steady. "I'm Teresa Park," she explained. "Mr. Vale hired me to care for these orchids, and to look after the property if anything ever happened to him." My heart clenched. Even in secrecy, Michael had surrounded this place with care. He hadn't just built a sanctuary, he had trusted others to protect it too. Teresa set down the spray bottle and motioned for me to follow. We crossed the garden to a weathered tool shed, its roof sagging, boards rough with age. "Your husband was cautious," she said. "After his brothers came snooping last year, he grew more protective." Inside, the shed smelled of soil and rusted tools. Teresa moved to the far corner, shoved aside a stack of boxes, and revealed a heavy trapdoor built into the concrete floor. She pulled an iron key from her pocket and turned the lock. The door creaked open to a narrow staircase leading down. My pulse raced as we descended into darkness. At the bottom, Teresa flipped a switch and fluorescent lights flickered to life. It was no cellar, it was a command center. Maps covered the walls, detailed surveys of Blue Heron Ridge and surrounding land. Red circles marked areas labeled Phase 2 Expansion and Golf Course Corridor. On a long steel table sat binders stuffed with receipts, emails, and sworn affidavits. This was his war room, Teresa explained. Michael discovered Summit Crest's hidden plans, and he gathered proof of his brother's financial crimes. He wanted you to have it, Naomi. He knew the day would come when you'd need to fight. As I stood among the binders and maps, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The caller ID made my stomach drop. Sophie. Mom, she said the moment I answered, her voice tight. Why didn't you tell me about Dad's property? Uncle Victor already called. He says you're confused, and that we could all split the inheritance if I help him challenge the will. He wants me to meet them tomorrow. What is happening? The ache in my chest deepened. They had already reached her. Listen to me, Sophie, I said firmly. Do not sign anything. Do not meet them alone. This isn't about fairness, it's about your father's wishes. She let out a sharp breath. If there's money involved, don't I have the right to know the truth? You will, I promised, forcing calm into my voice. But right now you need to trust me. When the call ended, I stared at Michael's files spread across the table. His warning was coming true. Their strategy wasn't just to come after me. They would use my daughter against me too. The next afternoon I met Sophie at a quiet cafe tucked on a side street in Silver Ridge. She slid into the booth across from me, arms crossed, her expression guarded. Mom, I don't have long, she said. Victor arranged a dinner tonight with some investors. He thinks I should hear them out. I pulled a tablet from my bag and set it on the table. Before you do anything, I want you to see this. Her brow furrowed, but she leaned in as I tapped a file labeled for Sophie. Michael's face appeared on the screen, healthy and strong. Hey, sweetheart, he said warmly. If you're watching this, I'm no longer there to tell you myself. But you deserve the truth. Years ago, your uncle stole my share of our inheritance with forged documents. When I threatened to expose them, they tried to ruin me. I walked away and built a new life. But they haven't changed. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Michael's voice softened. Don't let them twist loyalty into greed. Family is not defined by who shares your blood, it's who protects your heart. Sophie wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, her voice steadier now. So what do we do, Mom? We can't just let them take everything Dad worked for. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. We don't fight on their terms, we fight on ours. That evening, back at Blue Heron Ridge, we spread Michael's blue folder across the dining table. Deeds, notarized transfers, bank statements, airtight proof. Alongside them, the binders from the bunker revealed years of financial manipulation and shady deals by Victor Pearson Noah. I called Daniel Price, the lawyer who had given me the key, and laid out the situation. He listened quietly before saying, "You're holding more leverage than you realize. We'll prepare for both a civil challenge and a negotiation." Teresa helped us rearrange the Great Hall like a boardroom, long table, projector, stacks of organized documents. Michael had left it all, waiting to be used. Finally, I reached out to Evan Carr, CEO of Summit Crest. He didn't know yet that the one property his entire expansion depended on now belonged to me. Michael used to say the best defense was to think 3 steps ahead. Now it was my turn to prove him right. The brothers arrived at 10 sharp the next morning, their black sedan crunching up the gravel drive. This time they didn't come alone. A man in a tailored suit trailed behind them, briefcase in hand, the look of a hired advisor. "Mrs. Quinn," Victor said smoothly when I opened the door, "we're here to settle this matter peacefully. No need to drag the courts into it." I led them into the dining hall where Sophie sat beside me, Michael's old watch gleaming on her wrist. Papers were neatly stacked at each seat, and the projector was already humming. Victor launched into his plan, suggesting we divide the property into equal shares. He spoke of unusable western acres as though they were worthless. I clicked the remote. A map glowed on the screen, overlaying Blue Heron Ridge with Summit Crest's proposed expansion. The unusable acres lined up perfectly with the planned golf course corridor. Their advisor frowned, shifting in his chair. "This changes things," he muttered. The side door opened, and in walked Evan Carr, CEO of Summit Crest, alongside my attorney. Victor's practiced smile faltered. I slid sealed packets across the table. "These are copies of records Michael gathered, proof of fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. If you press this fight, every page becomes public." Pierce paled. Noah glanced away. Sophie spoke then, her voice clear and steady. "You stole from my father once. You won't do it again." I met each of their eyes, withdraw your challenge, end your threats, walk away, or face the consequences. The silence that followed was thicker than stone. For the first time, I saw fear where arrogance had always lived. After the brothers stormed out, their advisor trailing behind, Evan Carr remained at the table. He studied me with quiet calculation, then glanced at the maps glowing on the projector. "You hold the linchpin of our entire Phase 2, he said evenly. "If you refuse to sell, the project dies. Tell me what you want." I took a measured breath. "Not money, protection. The land stays intact. The greenhouse and studio Michael built remain untouched. I'll lease a portion that doesn't harm the ridge, but the rest becomes a conservation zone." Evan tilted his head, and in return, "You fund a community endowment for the orchid collection, for an art program that welcomes anyone who needs a place to heal." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at his mouth. "Miss Quinn, you're not asking for fortune. You're asking for stewardship. I can respect that." The following morning I explored the east wing of the house, an area I hadn't dared to open before. At the end of a long corridor, double oak doors led into a room flooded with golden light. It was a studio. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the ridge outside, while shelves lined with brushes, paints, and empty canvases surrounded the space. Against one wall stood a tall storage cabinet. Inside were my old college paintings, pieces I thought had been lost when we moved years ago. Michael had saved them all. In the center of the room rested a single large canvas, wrapped in brown paper. Across the front, in Michael's familiar handwriting, were the words, "For when you're ready." My hand pressed to my mouth as tears welled. Michael hadn't just left me a house or a garden. He had left me a way back to myself, the part one had long buried under responsibility and grief. I unwrapped the canvas, set it on the easel, and dipped a brush into paint. The first stroke felt like breathing again after years underwater. The days that followed began to take on a rhythm I hadn't expected. Each morning, Sophie and I brewed coffee and sat together to watch one of Michael's recorded messages. Some were practical guides to bank accounts, notes on repairs. Others were tender, filled with stories he had never told in life. Afternoons were spent with Daniel finalizing contracts, or walking the land with Summit Crest surveyors to mark new conservation boundaries. Evenings belonged to the studio. I painted until the sun sank behind the ridge, colors spilling across canvas after canvas. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt alive, waiting. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, the crunch of tires on gravel reached my ears. I peered through the window and froze. It wasn't the brothers' sedan, but Victor's car alone. He stepped out slowly, his shoulders slumped, his usual sharpness dulled. When I opened the door, he didn't push or demand. He simply held out a small photograph. It showed 3 boys under a cottonwood tree, Victor, Pierce, and Michael as children. In Michael's hands was a tiny orchid plant, his smile wide and proud. "I found this in Dad's desk," Victor said quietly. "I thought you should have it. I was wrong about many things." For the first time, his eyes softened, and for the first time I believed him. Weeks later, after contracts were signed and the house no longer felt like a secret but a home, I stumbled upon one last video file hidden deep in the laptop. Michael's face appeared, his eyes steady and calm. "Naomi, if you're seeing this, you've done what I hoped. You protected Blue Heron Ridge and yourself. But remember, the house, the orchids, the studio, they aren't the legacy. The real legacy is choice. The choice to love, to build, to keep creating even when life tries to take everything away." I paused the screen, staring at his frozen smile. In the studio, a new canvas waited. On it, I painted a woman and her daughter standing together at the ridge, a man behind them offering a single blue orchid. Michael was gone, yet in every brushstroke he was still here. Looking back, I see that Michael's true gift was not the house or even the land. It was the reminder that strength is quiet, steady, and often born in the hardest silences. I learned that family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty. That protecting what matters does not always mean fighting louder, it means standing firmer. And that legacy is not measured in money, but in love carried forward. If this story touched you, let it remind you to guard the things and the people that give your life meaning. Please tap like so others can find this story too. Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if you'd like to hear more stories of quiet strength, subscribe to The Art of Revenge.